Jesus who died shall be sad.
He did have other interests. He had a love of music, and I think some of that information has been shared with you already. And maybe that's where Oksana gets that from. She may be.
She said your parents loved music. She remembered the talent nights at the church that your mother was leading, and
that's right.
The kids' choir. Your mother kind of spearheaded that for the kids' choir. We spent a lot of time on that.
I remember that, and produced an album. In fact,
yes,
a cassette.
Along with
your wife, and
I never heard you go a bit deeper there. Your father with music. Did he play any instruments? Did he sing? I saw him as the academic, the writer.
Yes.
Expand what more about the musical part that I don't know about. Was it all your mom, or? What?
Well, my mom loved music, and my mom was a wonderful singer
in the choir.
In the choir.
Your dad never sang in the choir.
I don't think
no
my
time
dad
for that.
Have a career in actually singing, but what he really enjoyed were the lyrics.
Okay.
He also
translated
songs. He held Pukine brother Bichkowski in extremely high esteem. He was and brother Kostiw, who was the choir leader at the church, and brother Zubulevich, who used to be the I guess the sub when brother Kostiw was in there. But he loved to hear brother Kosenko sing, and he related all this, the music that you and your brothers put together, and Walter Kohut. He just loved that. He enjoyed listening to the music, and there are many we have many Ukrainian CDs and tapes that he listened to as well. He loved the Bandureste. He just loved Ukrainian songs in general. But
did that ever rub off on you? Did you get any of the music at all in your side? Oksana got. I know.
Yeah, Oksana got it.
Got it all, or
you wouldn't want to hear me sing. I enjoy Ukrainian songs.
Did you not dance in the days of when you were younger? Right? Were you part of a Ukrainian dance troupe?
I wasn't. Most of my friends were, and I had kind of my upbringing was somewhat different from the brothers and sisters in the Ukrainian Baptist Church, because I spent a lot of time growing up with Ukrainian Catholic friends, and therefore spent time in the Ukrainian Catholic Church as well, and where the customs and the traditions were a little bit different. But in answer to your question, music was not my forte, although I enjoyed listening to music, and I loved all the musicians at the church. So sadly, that part was not really passed down to me. But luckily, I think my sisters got more of that. My daughter, I think he may have skipped a generation, because my daughter is a very talented flutist or flautist, and as a matter of fact, she would play at weddings when she was still in high school, and a very accomplished musician. So
you're telling us at the hospital she actually recorded CDs and Ukrainian songs for your dad to play in the hospital, and
that's right.
Where did that's part of her music?
She has a passion for music, and she had a very close relationship with Yuda. She knew he loved music, and so one day she arrived at the hospital with a burnt CD with not only some of his favorite music, but also with poetry. Shevchenko poetry, Lasha Ukrainka, Ivan Franko, all the famous poets that my father read about and has books on. So she downloaded this poetry, and we would play the poetry to him. And interestingly enough, even in his latter days, after all the trauma that Tata experienced with the fall at the house and the surgery, he knew the Virshikya, he knew the, I'm translating from Ukrainian to English now, the Virshikya, the
verses,
the lyrics. He knew all that by heart. In fact, he would listen to the poetry, and he would be able to recite it ahead of the
Before the person was reciting it.
That's right. So and it's just an amazing gift, ability, a computer-like mind, a brilliant mind. Just hard to believe that he can retain so much information, even at an elderly age. I'll just tell a story. He's able to remember phone numbers better than I was. In fact, he would memorize my cell phone number, and I wouldn't even know it. I'd ask him, "Todd, what's the phone number?" But in a short period of time, within 3, 4, 5 minutes, he will memorize. He'll memorize a phone number. How he did it, I don't know. I once asked him to share his secret, and I never got the answer. But I think it has something to do with the superior mind that he had.
Let me just dwell on this point for a second about music very quickly, and we'll spend a few minutes. You can tell us about the room next door and where the desk was at. I do have a picture of that, but every interview that I've done in the last 2 weeks, I've always shared my recollections of the person and the family, and that was more to get them to open up and let them know how my family valued their friendship in the church. And so here's some thoughts as you were talking about that years ago. But I remember I met your wife, Chris, through working at Future Bakery, and she would be selling the cashier there, and you would always come and pick her up. And she was an incredible person. The word would proper, I don't know how you put it, very proper, cultured. Her parents came in, and she was very serious too, a very serious person, but she was going to be a teacher, I believe, and I think did she end up?
She achieved her dream. She's been a teacher for many, many years. I want to be correct on this, 26 years teaching. Elementary, kindergarten, her passion, kids. But you have a very good memory to remember.
I worked at the bakery 7 or 8 years, and you would always come and pick her up. You would stand there at that sliding door and wait for her to. If you weren't there, her parents were there. I remember her father. Remember at the funeral, her mother's in the wheelchair, right, and the father was there too. But you're telling me while your father was in the hospital, Chris is dealing with both of her parents, and you're all going through the health issues at the same time there, and that was a difficult time just the last month that everyone's kind of going through that. But remember her mother, always and dad, just smiling, standing there. So were they a quiet, soft-spoken family? That's what I saw from the three of them. And did Chris take on the parents' genes? And I've never been in their home, but when I looked at that, I looked at that, wow, you're marrying an incredibly, because I spent a lot of time at the bakery many years, and you can watch a person dealing with people, but very gentle, very kind, very gracious. Is that the person that
you'll have to come over for dinner one day and visit with us, because it's been a long time.
We will catch up.
We'll have to catch up for sure. What can I say? I'm being taped. My wife is a wonderful wife, and everything you say is true. And I'm amazed that you remember those Future Bakery days, because that takes us back.
I was in grade 7, and I was 12 years old, so that was 1972 up until second year university, 1980. The next memory is your wedding, and I think you gave a blanket invitation, and you got married in our Toronto church.
That's right. My father married all 4 children.
I heard that at the funeral, and I do recall the big pulpit that was a sin to move. That pulpit was moved because there's an entranceway between the 2 little sides. That was cleared, and the wedding was going on. What I never forgot, because we never heard that in that church, the only time, is we're sitting, this is for the audience, we're sitting in the main floor, and all of a sudden this choir starts singing. And the men's choir was up in the balcony. And we all turned around, and we're all looking and listening. And when you hear Ukrainian men sing with those voices, they lifted the rafters of that church like it's never, because no choir has ever been up there.
That's right.
It's always been at the front.
It's always been at the front.
So they hear that men's choir, how did that come into the picture? Chris's was her father singing in the choir? I'm not sure. Can you?
Yes, my father-in-law, Chris's father, Bob Holinsky, he is a talented musician himself. As a matter of fact, his father, Mikhailo Holinsky, was an opera singer, and he was a professional opera singer. And in those days, he would travel Europe, and so there's a gene there, and it may have skipped a generation with my wife. Don't tell her I said that. In any event, the
music was a big part in her family as well.
Was a huge part in her.
Did her mom
family.
sing in a choir, or did
her mom wasn't actively involved?
More her father.
My father-in-law sang in several choirs, but in fact he sings at the church choir, his church choir to this day. But he was actively involved in a men's choir called charitable, and oftentimes I remember people from the church would visit when charitable sang. I remember Brother Eugene Kosenko and Brother Ostapchuk attending. Who, interestingly enough, because you're a historian, I'll mention this, that my father-in-law and Walter Ostapchuk went to school together. They used to ski together in Germany, and there was a real close connection there between the Ostapchuk family and
I remember Mr. Ostapchuk always going out whenever things were happening and special services going on in the choir. I do recall in the church he was telling us, I was over with Kostiws or whatever, and there, so that was, I didn't realize
the connection. Yeah. So my father-in-law, as I say, he was passionate about music, and I think he regretted that none of us became pianists because his mother was a concert pianist, and very well-known, renowned concert pianist.
And that was back in Ukraine?
That was started in Ukraine and carried on here, and then she actually, when she was in Toronto, she taught music lessons. So yes,
who was this again?
this would be Chris's grandmother.
I was thinking your dad's line. No, Chris's grandmother.
Chris's grandmother.
Okay.
She's a concert pianist, and so therefore both my father-in-law's parents were heavily involved in music. One an opera singer, one a concert pianist. So my father-in-law, he actually sang in the opera. He was part of the opera for many years here in Toronto, and they traveled abroad. But his real passion was singing in this choir called Charitable. So to get back to your question, how did this happen? Well, because my father-in-law was very much involved in Charitable, he asked a few of his good friends, including a wonderful musician named Ola Camille, who was the director of the choir at the time, to sing at the wedding, and they happily did so. So that explains how we ended up with this choir on the balcony.
I've never forgotten that time because it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and
they're wonderful musicians.
And I was there. There was a third time. I don't know if you recall. Your dad preached quite a few times for our Christmas concerts in January. Ukrainian Christmas. The church was jam-packed.
I remember those days.
Much to chagrin. Sometimes he went a bit overtime because he did the whole history of the Ukrainian.
Yes.
But I remember getting up there, the church was packed, and just his command again, you held a picture up downstairs. He would bring in all these names of his mentor, his hero. He would bring them all in, and he would go on, and that was just, it was an incredible time. We're going to break in a few seconds. I wanted to show the other room there, but just so that I don't have a long clip on the memory card or in the computer or whatever. And I know your chair's squeaking a bit there, so that might pick up on the floor there. But
well, the chairs, I must tell you, Peter, the furniture in this house is about 150 years old, so this furniture is on its way out. That's for sure. Our father, I don't think, bought a piece of furniture in his life. This was not something that he was particularly interested in, and many times we offered to buy a new couch or new furniture. Of course, my father would decline any kind of offer.
It's that lifestyle where other things were more important.
Absolutely.
Let me end on this one story, and that's where I kind of started on, and we'll take a break and just move on a little other section there. But you shared at the funeral about someone coming to the door of this house and wanting to borrow money.
That's a true story.
And just tell the audience there, because we started laughing a bit on other things, and they'll hear it from the CD, but tell us that story as we just wrap up this section here, especially in this house, and replay those events again.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, my father was a very charitable person. He was a man of minimal needs. And in this area, oftentimes people would knock on the door, homeless people, people with a variety of problems, mental health problems, substance abuse problems. For whatever reason, they would gravitate towards Dad's house, or they'd be on the street, they'd be walking down the street towards Bloor Street, and they would knock on the door and they would ask for a donation. My father always kept loonies in the porch, just beside us here. And in fact, every time I visited him, we'd have to go and
replenish it, or
10 or 20 new loonies, because he would not refuse a donation. And people, they would come and try to solicit money from him, and he would listen very patiently. And then he had a little bin just by the windowsill. He would pick up a loonie and he'd say, "There you go, there's your contribution." And the people would say, "Oh my goodness, I spent so much time here," but that was his contribution. So it was not unusual
for him
someone,
to do that.
For him to do that.
We didn't hear that part, but he's ready.
But the part that I spoke about at the funeral was a little bit different. He was used to people coming to the porch and asking for money, but the fellow who came to the house this time, he didn't just ask for a loonie. He asked for my dad to give him all his money. And my dad never had too much cash in the house. However, for whatever reason, he had $200 or $300 at the time. We were probably going to Canadian Tire somewhere. Actually, we were probably going to buy envelopes for so he can segregate his material here, or a bookshelf. I can't remember. In any event, he had a sum of cash, and so the robber, or the would-be robber, said,
he wasn't realizing he was being robbed.
Where do you keep all your money? And so my father said, "I keep my money, upstairs in my bedroom." And he was, "Do you want to see?" Basically invited him upstairs. The guy took all his money. He gave him his wallet back, actually, and there were no credit cards in the wallet. There was just cash. So he gave him the cash, and they got
$200. You were saying
it was about $200. My dad doesn't know the exact amount. But they got talking, and he actually said, "By the way, are you hungry? Would you like a piece of sponge cake? And you can have some collage, because I had too many, because my son buys me 3 every week and I only need 2. So he offered him some collage, and the guy basically thanked him and left. And the reason I know this, my dad would have never relayed this story to me, but the reason I know this is shortly thereafter, a day or two later, when I came to the house, I asked my father, "What is the agenda for today?" Because it was always,
his agenda.
So
strict directive.
Very strict directive. So he said, "We're going to the bank." And I said, "Dad, why are we going to the bank? We just took out some money. Where did the money go?" And out of curiosity, not in
Where'd it go?
In an
accusatory
way, but where did the money go? So he told me the story, and at that time there were other people who were having troubles in the neighborhood, and I said, "Todd, we really should call the police and have this reported." And he said, "Absolutely not. He probably needed the money more than I did." And I'm sure Dad was right. So that's the story I relate at the funeral, and there are other stories I can relate about charity as well. One kind of funny one, and where we went grocery shopping to Loblaws, and you always have people around there who are begging for money, down and outers, and Dad liked to help down and outers all the time, and. Normally they collect a dollar or a loonie. My dad gave the guy a $5 bill. This is when he could still see, and the guy he gave the money to asked if my dad wanted change. He said, "No, keep the change," because I guess it was a substantial donation in the eyes of the. So he would routinely do that. He would share his money. The little money he had, he would share with other people gladly and happily, and it was never a huge concern for him. He lived, within his means, and had a very, as I mentioned, meager lifestyle. So.
This was wanted to end on that note and just take a little break, and we'll just catch up a bit more. This was a giving house. He not just gave of his time and the articles, but I wanted to include that as well, that whoever came to the door, I know your dad was that type of dad, and you gave us a different side of him, even with that story where faith played into it. You shared as well how he lived so simply, but he really relied on God, as you were sharing too, on just his everyday needs, and he didn't make a lot of money. But can you just end off on that?
I can.
How did you?
My father was extremely, as most people in the audience will know, he was a very, very spiritual person. And that spirituality carried him through, I think, especially in the latter days. My father meditated a lot. He was very lonely towards the end. Many of his friends passed on, who the audience will know. And so, besides visits, frequent visits from Pastor Davidyuk, who was his close friend, colleague, and my sisters and myself and the grandchildren would drop in. He was alone a lot, and that must have taken his toll on him. But as I say, it's his spirituality got him through. He never complained. This is someone who was very much at peace. And again, it's a remarkable story in the sense that he was able to live on his own for so long, but it was the spirituality, number one, the discipline we talked about already. But he was at peace despite the fact that he had very little in material ways.
You shared in the hospital the nurses, as we wrap up this portion, of just how he treated the hospital wasn't for him, but
No.
what did the nurses say? I think you shared that.
Well, the nurses, they were so amazed at my father's politeness. He was polite to everyone all the time. And the nurses commented at the end, towards the end, that they had never experienced a patient who was so kind, gentle, and polite as my father. As a matter of fact, when visitors like yourself came to see Dad, instead of receiving the prayer, he would like to pray for them. And so he was a very giving person.
We're going to end right now just on this portion of it. Take a little break, and we'll connect just a bit back on very quickly maybe what Terry's done with your life.
Sure.
Growing up very quickly, the career you're in, profession, and a lot of the audience probably who might not have met you over the last 20 or 30 years, I'm sure would have questions. Who is Terry Taras Kostiw, and where is he at today, and what is he doing with his life? And that'll catch up. There's a lot of guys there that you connected with in the Toronto church, and when they're watching this, that'll give them a little up to speed. So
okay, sounds good.
We're going to break here and come back in a few seconds.
soul.